What's up? What's up? And welcome to Just Be Humans, the definitive podcast for business leaders who have built their businesses through relationships and are looking at digital marketing to scale to help punch them through their revenue ceilings and breaking down those core critical human virtues that we use every single day as we continue to build and nurture our relationships. And how do we take that to the digital front to increase the scalability of our relationships? I'm Danny Marawinski, your host, and today's episode is an interesting one. It's really diving deep into the law of averages and how the human virtue has an effect on the law of averages. So let's get started. First and foremost, what is the law of averages? I'm sure if you've been in the sales world, you've probably heard this. This is probably like the number one metric that we've used throughout the years that's withstood the test of time. So the law of averages in sales and marketing basically states that there's a 1% chance that you can close a deal. So meaning if you're going around and knocking on door to door to door, you can knock on 100 doors selling your knives or whatever it is, right? And the likelihood is you're going to get one interested person for every 100 that you do. So we use this all the time as kind of the baseline metric for when we're approaching a new client or a new customer and exit build. So as we're looking into the digital marketing landscape, we kind of use that as a benchmark to understand how we're going to budget, right? So if we get 100 clicks, we're going to get one conversion. That's the kind of gist that we do. And then you can break down the cost per click, depending on the platform that you're advertising on, to then say, okay, if the average click is $5, that means that we're going to spend $500 to get one potential close. It's a good kind of starting block, but in that process, first off, we got to understand a little bit about the history of the law of averages. Where did it actually come from? What does it actually mean? What's the statistical relevance of it? And then we also need to understand how the impact of the humanistic element actually dramatically changes that. And what we can do in our day to day, even stuff that we can do today that can change the outcomes, that can increase the conversion rates, and so on and so forth. So let's dive in a little bit of the history of the law of averages. So the law of averages is, we've kind of repurposed that term over and over, but it really came from the law of large numbers. This was a concept developed by Jaco Bernoulli back in the late 1600s, early 1700s, right? And the idea is if we took like a coin, right? Technically, there should be a 50-50% chance that it's going to land on heads or tails. And that's true over a very large sample size. But if you were to flip the coin 10 times, the probability of it landing 5 times heads, 5 times tails is actually like 0.47%. So as you scale that number up to, say, 1,000 flips, we start seeing that the mean of the average flips starts to slowly increase towards that 50% mark, but it's not done in a very short sample size. It's done in a large sample size. And as you drag that out to infinity, then yes, in fact, it does break down to that number of 50%, given that there's only 2 potential options. If we relate that back into sales and marketing, it's kind of synonymous in saying that, well, there's a 50-50 shot that we're going to get a deal or not get a deal. It's kind of binary. However, that's only assuming that those are the only 2 variables that affect that outcome. And as we know, us as human beings, we're much more complex than that. And there's a lot of other factors that go into play where that can dramatically affect that number. For instance, if your sales pitch is buy now or you're going to lose out on this deal, and that's how you approach every single customer, I'd be willing to bet that you won't hit anywhere near 50%, let alone 1% over time. And that's because there's other factors and elements that go into that trigger the emotional responses, that trigger the red flags, and people sniffing out the BS and being like, I don't want this. This feels scammy. This feels pushy. This feels this. This feels that. That's the human element that we're going to kind of break down today. But there is a core critical element on this, and that is repetition. So this is going back to my history of me experiencing, we've done now between myself, my teams, across all the different organizations that I've been a part of in the last 5 to 10 years regarding digital marketing and sales. I've probably done north of 100,000 cold calls. Okay. So this isn't something that like I just figured out last week and when we did 1,000 calls. My team does 1,000 cold calls a week. We're growing that team. We're going to be doing 2,000 cold calls a week. So we're learning a lot in the process, right? And our conversion rates are much higher than 1%. They're not quite at 50% yet, but they are starting to increase up to the 20, 30% range. So what's changed? What's changed about our approach, and what's changed about the way that we approach this law of large numbers as we look at it from the humanistic element? Well, let's just go back to some basic examples of regular human interaction. If no matter what, and I, this is something up for debate, and I'll preface this with this is purely my opinion, and I know that there's others out there that believe different things. But for me, I truly believe that there is no such thing as a selfless act. So let me explain. If I donate money or if I do something good for somebody else, I may not get a monetary return, but I am getting an emotional return, right? So I'm getting a feel good from doing it. So if I go pick up a homeless person and I get him showered and clean, give him a hotel room, buy him new clothes, buy him a house, do this, do that, that person may never repay me back from an ROI standpoint and a monetary standpoint, but I will get ROI back and what feels good in the process. And I think that that's true when it comes to a lot of stuff that we do in business. I think that sometimes, yes, we do just want to help other people. And that's great. And I think that that's a great angle to start at because I do believe, just much like Steve Jobs has talked about, when you work on you focus on the top line, the bottom line will be a byproduct of it, right? And I think that there's a lot of truth to that when it comes to helping people, especially when it comes to digital content. And I've talked about this in past episodes. Actually, the last episode we just released was all about the offer and creating a high value offer that actually converts. And that was all around how we position an offer that only serves the client or the customer or the audience, right? And not necessarily directly correlates to our core offer and products and services. And that's where we start to build the relationships at scale. So when we start thinking about this law of averages, as we start to plan out the way that we're going to project a campaign or we're going to project, the return rates on an investment, that's where we look at that 1% benchmark to kind of as a starting block. But what we learn in the process through repetition is we start learning things that do work and things that don't. And then we refine the script. And every single time we refine the script, we refine the message, we refine the content, we refine the video, we refine the copy, we refine the targeting, so on and so forth, we change the game of what that probability will be because we've inserted a new variable. So this is an important thing to note because sometimes that variable is going to work and we're going to see an increase, and other times that variable's not going to work and we're going to see a decrease. We need to be receptive and we need to be open-minded in that moment to understand why things are working and why things are not. And oftentimes, the reason why things start to work is because we may not be conscious of it at the time or even focusing in on this. But what we are actually creating is an environment that human beings can participate in that brings them so much value that they want to come back for more. So here's a real example of that. When you go to pitch a Fortune 500 company in their boardroom, which I've had plenty of experiences doing, you sit there, right? And I'll just use this one example. When I pitched a Fortune 500, I won't use names, but a Fortune 500 company, large company, they were in the defense contracting space. And I walked into their war room, their big conference room, and I was faced with 15 decision makers. Okay. It was a horseshoe shaped seating arrangement where everybody that in the company sat, and I was right smack in the middle. There's about a 20-foot screen behind me that I displayed our demos of the software that we were trying to sell, and so on and so forth. I had 1 hour to pitch. Okay, that's a lot of time to pitch. It's a lot of time standing up in front of a crowd like that, where you're constantly monitoring the emotions, the body language, are people looking at their phones, so on and so forth. In that moment, what I repurposed the pitch from benefits and features of the product, I focused in on what the actual pain points were from the company. And that came from due diligence of learning about the company. So all the way build up to this moment when I had the chance to drive a sale home, instead of me focusing in on look at all the great things that our software can do, it was more of, hey, I realize and recognize that you guys have hit a certain point where we need a change. You're requesting a change. That's why you're giving me the time. You're giving me the time because you're exploring new ways of working and new ways of going about doing business. And you all believe that this might have some legs to help get you there. So the whole pitch got restructured to be about them, not about us. And that was the definitive moment that actually pushed the bar over pushed the ball over the finish line, where we got the win and we got to launch the pilot. So when we think about that, and we think about these interactions that we're doing, especially on the digital landscape, you got to be able to create this environment where people feel included, they feel heard, they feel that their message is clearly demonstrated, and that it's very well received. That's the first step. And if you can focus on those experiences and those environments, well, that's where you're going to start to see the needle move for the business. So let's break down some basic human virtues. And I've talked about this. This is an ongoing theme. This isn't something new. If you've been a part of this podcast since the beginning, you've heard me use this word in probably every single episode. And that word is empathy. Empathy is a human virtue. It's something that we can use, that we can demonstrate, that people feel. It's tangible. So how can you be empathetic in your message? Well, let's keep in mind, prior to your engagement, prior to the big boardroom sales pitch, prior to the information gathering phase of your deal, prior to the first contact, these folks that we are marketing to have lived their life without you. These folks have gotten somewhere and done something without you. So if we position the message of saying, hey, we know you're already successful, or we know that you've already done amazing things, or we've identified you as a thought leader, we've identified you as someone of value. That's the first part of the message, that you will see more people willing to take your message, willing to listen to your notes, willing to consume your content. So why is that? Well, think inwardly for a second and think about how you would like to be approached. We all have done great things in our life. I believe that without a doubt. I don't care if you have sold millions of dollars or you have never sold a thing in your life. It doesn't matter. We've all done something amazing, something impactful in our lives. And that is the part that we need to enter the conversation in on. And that in itself is demonstrating empathy. So when we tack on that human virtue and we change the ability to flip the coin of a win or a loss, and now we're inserting a new variable called empathy, we're going to have a higher conversion rate. And we've seen that in the thousands of sales calls that we did. I went through the painstaking process of calling hundreds, thousands of people pitching a Google Ads campaign, meaning the company I was working for sold Google Ad Management. So my pitch was, hey, give me access to your Google Ads account and we'll give you a free audit. Now, that sounds like a pretty positive offer. However, that offer was still focused inward at the company. And that's why I got plenty of FUs, hangups, don't call me again from the get-go, right? Because these folks have been approached that way before. Hey, I'm going to give you something free for my company. Nope, click, done. There's a catch. Of course, there's a catch. I'm trying to win your business. So, what worked when I closed the Dallas Mavericks? Actually, I'll be full disclosure. I actually didn't close them on the call, but I was the first to contact them and get the meeting. The company ended up closing them down the road. So just want to be clear on that. But what worked when I called the chief marketing officer of the Dallas Mavericks? Why did he take my call? Why did he agree to the meeting? Because did I pitch the audit? Well, not necessarily out of the gates. Instead, this is what I realized. When I looked at their merchant, so they started selling their own jerseys. So let's kind of look at the landscape. I happen to know because we also had the Dallas Cowboys as a client at the time. Well, the Dallas Cowboys was the first team, the first NFL team or professional team in that world that actually decoupled themselves from Fanatics. Fanatics has a stronghold on all the different companies out there, all the major sports teams. That's why you see them on the jerseys and so on and so forth. So the Dallas Mavericks moved away from, the Dallas Cowboys moved away from Fanatics. Well, when I looked at the Dallas Mavericks, when I looked at their e-commerce site and I looked at the jerseys that they were selling, I quickly realized that they were on Shopify. That triggered in my head to note, hey, they just broke off from Fanatics. So I happened to do some research and some digging, and I found through open source the actual cell phone number of their new chief marketing officer that they just brought on that was helping make that transition. So when I called that chief marketing officer, I said, hey, I just want you to know that I noticed your shop is no longer a part of Fanatics. Is that true? So when I opened it that way, they were like, wow, first off, this person cares, right? I didn't just come in and say, hey, I see you're running Google ads and we can make them better, because that probably would have just got shut down. I showed that I actually did some due diligence. I did some research. I actually cared. That was me demonstrating care. They, of course, were like, yeah, thanks. How did you notice that? And I was like, oh, I noticed you're on Shopify. And to be on Shopify means that you must have unplugged from Fanatics. Tell me, what was it that was that decision-making factor? Why did you guys make that gap, that leap to do that? And that's where I position that question in an empathetic manner, meaning, wow, good for you. You broke off from the conglomerate. What was that factor that decided to do that? I created an environment that individual felt comfortable enough to respond and share their story. Because of the entry point that I did, I ended up landing the meeting with him where he said, okay, I'm interested. I'm willing to chat with you and your company. As soon as I got off the phone, I ran it up the flagpole, and the top executives of the company took the call. And I got to say, this is the other part. So I was super nervous. I was a $14 an hour, entry level salesperson. Technically, I probably shouldn't have been calling bigger companies like that. I mean, it wasn't like necessarily written in my guardrails of what I could and couldn't do, but I was supposed to be focused on small businesses, right? And running this other pitch. Instead, I took a different approach and I was calling less call volume and more bigger businesses and trying to get their attention. So anyways, when I opened the next call and the next meeting, I totally blew it. I stumbled across my words. I was super nervous. I was scared. And that came through and was very clear to the prospect. And it was like, okay, what is going on here? Like, I thought these guys knew what they were doing. And this guy that spoke obviously didn't sound good. So I ended up dropping the ball in that meeting. We didn't close on that meeting. However, at that point now, guess what? The executives of the company now had the start of a relationship. What happened over the years was nurture, right? Where they started to work more and more closely with the chief marketing officer and the executive team over at the Dallas Mavericks. They had the past performance with the Dallas Cowboys, hometown, not competing rivals, two different sports. So they were able to kind of continue to work that deal. And now the Dallas Mavericks jersey lives in their office and they're still an ongoing client. The point to the story is that as I was calling at volume, I started switching the script around a little bit. And I started using this empathetic approach and this caring approach. And that can be done at scale. Okay. That can be done through a digital marketing campaign. The trick is how we position the offer and what we are actually offering. Because again, if the offer is just the free audit or the free trial, and I talked about this in the last episode, well, we're not going to get as good of a response. In fact, most people are going to know right out of the gates, like, okay, I'm entering into a sales funnel and I don't want to deal with that. Even if the audit might benefit them, I still don't want to deal with that. So we need to rethink the way that we position these offers as we contact people at scale. And that's where creating these environments in which they are comfortable sharing their stories and sharing their information and then getting them to ask questions should be the primary focus of growing any business. Same rules apply when we're talking about a B2C business. I just had a great conversation yesterday. Again, we won't mention the names, but this individual manages athletes and has a company that he's looking to grow. And as I was talking to him about things that he's tried, he's been through the gamut of 15 other marketing companies. All of them flopped, no results. And what I understood at that point was they were trying to force feed a product market into the regular consumer. This is a product that any one of us could easily consume. So that means that they're now competing for attention with all the entertainers of the world. The Rock, the Kardashians, you name it. All the other distractions. If you think about all the other distractions we get in the digital front, when we are marketing to the general populace, we are actually in competition with everybody out there that's putting out content trying to capture their attention. So we really need to figure out a way to differentiate ourselves amongst the crowd. So if we're going down the entertainment side of it, meaning we're creating funny content or we're creating, intriguing content, then we need to figure out something that's different than the rest of the entertaining content there. Or we take something that does work and we put our own twist and spin onto it to capture the attention. On the other side of it, there's also educational content, much like this podcast. So this podcast is focused to be educational, not so much entertaining. As much as I'd love to entertain you guys and hopefully maybe my personality will come out in some sort of way that it will be entertaining. I think that's great, but that's not the main focus or the purpose of my content. My content is to help educate and give back on that front. Why? Because I'm creating these environments in which people can learn from my experiences and the experiences of the guests that I bring onto the show, and knowing that if they continually consume the content, yes, in fact, there will be a percentage of them that will come back and want to do business with me and my company. So that's the kind of truth behind it, right? So we need to think about that from a scalable message and a scalable platform. There are all sorts of ways that we can do this, and there's all sorts of things that you've probably already been exposed to that people are doing, such as bringing you on as a guest in a podcast or a newsletter or a publication, or bringing you in as a community member, bringing you in as a speaker. All these different things that people do to create these environments in which you can thrive and you have a platform to stand on and your message is clearly heard and received by more than just one person, but a greater audience. And that's where people are willing to start to communicate backwards to you. That's where they're going to start asking questions. And when they start asking questions, that's when the chase begins. That's when they start chasing you. That's the trigger moment for us to then say, okay, we've given value. That's when we know we've actually demonstrated and delivered value back. And that is the time that we need to hit pause on the entire process and take a retrospective look of what we did to get that human being to ask us a question naturally. What was the thing that we did? So again, in that example with the CMO from the Dallas Mavericks, why did he start to ask questions about what we did? Because I recognized where they were currently at, right? Leaving Fanatics, going on to Shopify. And I recognized that they were working on an ad campaign around it. And my initial question to them was, why? Why did you decide to do this? You're obviously already successful. I don't need to tell you that the Dallas Mavericks is a multi-billion-dollar organization, that it's very widely known. It's a household name in America. Like, I don't need to tell them about the clout. They know that. So I'm taking the empathetic approach of being like, hey, I get it. I checked the box. Trust me, I get it. You're there. You're doing something big. But why are we making this step? That shows empathy. And that's when someone is willing to say, let me tell you more. So back into the law of averages, when we look at this, right? As we build out the campaigns, I think it's still a decent, checkbox to say we're going to make a 1% conversion. I do believe that that's a good starting block for us. But keep in mind that beyond that, we do have these critical human virtues and elements. Another human virtue or element is to show admiration for somebody, right? So admiration is different from envy. Envy is a little bit more, like cynical in a way. It's like, oh, I wish I was you, right? Admiration is like, wow, I want to know more about how you got there. And that's another way that we can approach people, and getting them to engage with us, with our brand, is to show admiration. Wow, you've done something big. A real example of that was last night. I was at the Tampa Club. I met a gentleman. He's doing a book release. And my approach to him was like, wow, that's amazing. I'd love to learn more. Would you be interested in being a guest on the show and telling us more about what got you to this place? He was like, absolutely. Here's my card. Here's my contact information. I'll gladly be on the show. Not once did I talk about what I could do for him. Not once did I talk about what my company could do for him. Not once did I talk about the things that we could help blow him up with, right? It was just, hey, would you be interested in being a part of my show? I'm very interested in how you got to this point in the first place. I have admiration for what you have done. So I implore you all, as you look at your digital marketing strategies, as you look at the things that you are doing, write down a list. Write down a list of some human virtues that fall in suit. And you could even do this, leverage ChatGPT to help you with it, right? Like, go to ChatGPT and be like, hey, give me 20 different synonyms to empathy, to caring, to admiration, and look at what those human values and traits are and virtues, and then start to pick and choose each one of those. So then say, okay, I'm going to focus in on this one on this message. I'm going to focus on this one on this message. And here's a great way that you can structure your campaigns so you actually have something measurable to measure against. Your baseline campaign should be, and this is going to sound interesting, right? But it should be a direct message to your product. Buy now kind of message. That we're going to use as our constant. And I can tell you, you're not going to see a high performance on that, but we need it because it's binary. We do need a binary single outcome kind of deal. It's either going to work or it's not. And we need to just strip away the fluff of the message. We need to strip away all the other things around it so we have something to measure against. So that's step one. Then we're going to start to create other campaigns, and we're going to keep the variables the same. So we're going to keep the audience the same, the way that we're targeting, that's going to remain the same. And we're also going to keep the offer the same for the next test. All right. But now we're going to switch the message. We're going to switch the copy. We're going to switch the video. And we're going to take that first step into an empathetic approach. So that's where it's going to be less of buy now to, hey, I know you've gotten to where you're at this point, insert pain, right? You're probably experiencing this pain, and then insert antigen. You should check out our product or service. Now compare that against the first constant. Does it do better? Does it do worse? Likely it'll probably start to do a little bit better. Then we're going to create a third campaign, okay? And on the third level of the campaign, we're going to change one more variable. We're going to take away that offer about the free trial or our stuff or, product or service. We're going to reposition it to a new offer. We're going to invite people to be a part of our community. We're going to invite people at no cost. The only barrier to entry is we do need some form to contact them. And that's where you need to think about whatever that is that you're comfortable with within your own bandwidth. For some, a podcast is too much work. and it's going to be too much time. And I get that. Trust me, I was running 2 podcasts when I started this one. So I know how much work that goes into that. So that may not be right. You also might not want to be on camera. You might not be comfortable doing this. For me, I feel very at home and at peace on camera, in front of crowds, public speaking. It's my nature of I enjoy it, right? Like it's not something that I regret, or I'm like, or not regret, but resent, or I'm scared to do. It's just natural to me. So you got to think about what's natural for you. You might be really good at writing. So maybe it's an article that you want to write, right? And you can publish that article through a blog. It could be that you're interested in growing a newsletter. It could be that you have connections with another publication in which you'll share their story. Think like PR, right? There's a million and two different ways that you can look at your skill sets and the way that you can create an environment for somebody. So I would encourage you to focus in on the thing that you have an innate passion for, that you personally enjoy. If you don't enjoy podcasts, if you don't listen to podcasts, don't do podcasts. If you don't enjoy reading articles, don't do that. If you don't like getting newsletters in your inbox every day, don't do that. But what is it that you can do? What is the thing that moves you? What do you consume? Okay. And then we're going to create the new offer around that thing. And we're going to run that campaign. So that campaign is going to have the same audience targeting. We're going to maintain that as the same. We're not going to change our targeting parameters, but we are going to change the message. We're going to change the copy, just like we used in the last one, to take that empathetic approach. And we're going to change, the actual content, whether it be an image or a video. But then we're going to reposition a new offer that's going to invite people to be on this platform that we've created, in this environment, really, in which they can share their story. Then the last campaign. So this is the 4th campaign now. So remember, constant campaign, right? That's just a binary buy now campaign. Second campaign is an empathetic approach to a buy now. Third campaign is an empathetic approach to a community or some type of an environment. And then the last campaign, and that's all done through the same audience, the last campaign is we are going to switch our audience. We're going to try a new audience and apply the same messaging to a new audience. We're going to let that run, and we need to collect data on that for about 30 days at a minimum. Ideally, we're even looking into 60 days. And you shouldn't be thinking about how can I make money or get my ROI in the first 30 to 60 days. It's unrealistic, especially if you've never done this before and you have nothing to base any information on, which most businesses don't have a lot of data around this. A lot of businesses that we work with have never tried cold calling, have never tried any of these methods that we're doing. So that we really need 30 to 60 days of getting a baseline of understanding where the market sits and what's working, what's not. After you collect that data and you review it, you're going to see very clearly what's working and what's not. What you're then going to do is you're going to double down on what's working. We're going to maintain the copy. We're going to maintain the video. We're going to maintain the offer that is working. But now we're going to run the same exact campaign and we're going to change multiple different audiences. So we're going to start working all of the different demographics and the psychographics around that. And if you look at a great place to start with this is just go into Facebook and like Meta Business Suite and look at the ads manager and look at all the levels of targeting that you're able to do. That's where you can really get granular with your audience. You can take it a step further as you bring in these leads and bring in this data where you can actually insert emails of folks and create what's called a lookalike audience, where they will look at not just the demographics. Facebook's AI and algorithm will not look at just the demographics. They'll also look at the kind of content that these people consume and like to consume, and they're going to display your stuff where they like to consume their stuff, right? So then you break down multiple different audiences, and I recommend you do at least 10 campaigns around that, okay? This is, again, going to increase the number in which that we are putting out the message. Thus, we are going to start to see that the average of the conversion is going to increase to the likelihood, and ideally, we're getting closer to that 50% coin flip. We can get beyond that if we get really good at this, of course. But that's the starting block, okay, guys? So this is where we are taking this whole approach and taking this humanistic virtue and element part of it to go from message to offer, to who we're sending it to, and then we're going to see what's working and what's not. And then after that, once we start getting in the leads, then the real work starts. That's step one, is generate the leads. And that honestly is easier than you would think. It's not so hard to get attention. The thing that's hard is maintaining attention and then ultimately converting attention into customers. And that is where we dive into nurture. And I believe that is a great segue into next Tuesday's episode, where we will break down what it truly means to nurture a relationship, what it truly means to nurture a human being. And we can break that into all sorts of different categories. I won't go into too much more detail on this episode, but that'll be our next topic for sure. So I hope you guys found this interesting. If you haven't looked into the law of averages or the history of it, I highly encourage you guys to go look at the Bernoulli's principle. Bernoulli's, it's Bernouillis, that principle. Or you can just Google search the law of large numbers. I encourage you guys to go look at that so you understand the mathematical statistics around it, and then figure out a way that you can apply that into your strategy as you start to focus in on these humanistic virtues that we talk about here on this podcast, right? So again, I hope you guys found this interesting. If you did, do me a favor, please, the only ask I'll ever make on this is leave us a review, share this with some other folks that might benefit from it. I'm not doing this to make money, right? Like I'm not doing this podcast to monetize the podcast. My goal is to never monetize this podcast. Obviously, if you want to do work with my business, that's another story. And yes, this is used as a tool for me to help spread the word about who I am, the way that I look at the world. And ultimately, yes, I do have a business that does need to run, and it is a for-profit business. So I would be happy to do work with you if that's the interest, but that's not the goal of this. The goal of this is to help spread the word and the message around this and to truly help other people. It gives me a sense of purpose, and it gives me a sense of belonging in this community, right? So I'm just being transparent there. So please, if you do find this information valuable, that 5-star review means a lot to me. It means a lot when you share the podcast with other folks. I mean, it really does mean the world. That's where I get encouraged to continue doing this type of stuff. So that's my only ask. Again, this is Just Be Humans, the definitive podcast for business leaders who have built their businesses through relationships and are looking to digital marketing to scale. New episodes come out every Tuesday at 11 a.m., Thursday at 11 a.m. We'll be bringing on some more guests into the podcast. If you're interested in being a guest, you can go over to www.justbehumans.com. There's a little call to action on there that says interested in being a guest. Click it, fill out the form. We'll review it, and we'll set up a time to call and discuss, what the next steps are as far as getting you on as a guest. So guys, thank you again. This has been another episode, and I just appreciate your time and you consuming the content. And just guys, remember, as you go through this process, as you go through growing your business, that the most important thing is just be humans.